Hello to everyone watching and listening. To those of you joining me from your office, your home, your commute, or somewhere in between, welcome. If you're here, it means you care about leadership. Not just the title, not just the metrics, but the evolution of who you must become to carry real responsibility in a changing world. Welcome to New Age Leader Talk. My name is Chris Dang. In this series, I'm not here to give you surface-level motivation. I'm here to challenge the internal architecture of leadership. We're going to talk about power, but integrated power. We're going to talk about ambition, but conscious ambition. We're going to talk about strategy, but strategy grounded in internal stability. Because the world doesn't need louder leaders. It needs clearer ones. If you're building something, a company, a vision, a movement, or even rebuilding yourself, this space is for you. Let's go deeper. Let me start with something simple. Have you ever noticed who actually stabilizes a room when pressure rises? It's rarely the loudest voice. It's rarely the person speaking the fastest. It's the one whose presence slows everyone else down. So here's the real question. What if the future of leadership doesn't belong to the most dominant personality in the room, but to the most regulated nervous system in the building? What if the next generation of CEOs aren't defined by aggression, relentless speed, or the need to win every exchange, but by integration, clarity, and a strong internal architecture? For decades, we've celebrated extremes. The visionary genius who sees what no one else sees. The ruthless executor who drives results at any cost. The spiritual thinker who talks about purpose and consciousness. Each powerful, each incomplete on their own. Today, I want to introduce a different archetype, not one of these, but the integration of all three. I call it the hybrid CEO. This isn't a trend. It isn't personal branding. It isn't minimalist aesthetics and thoughtful captions on LinkedIn. It's something much deeper. It's a structural evolution in what leadership requires. Because the world has changed. The pressure is higher. The systems are more complex. The consequences of instability are amplified. And in this new environment, fragmented leadership no longer scales. The future belongs to those who can hold power without being consumed by it, who can move fast without becoming chaotic, who can build aggressively without collapsing internally. That's not style, that's architecture. But before we move forward, let me ask you something uncomfortable. After COVID, after remote work, after mental health awareness, after the so-called new normal, why are so many founders still exhausted? Why are so many leaders publicly successful and privately depleted? Scroll through social media and you'll see the new age version of leadership. Cold plunges at 5 a.m., productivity stacks, biohacking routines, vision boards, silent retreats between funding rounds. It looks evolved. But let me ask you, if we are more conscious than ever, why are we more anxious than ever? If we talk more about balance, why are burnout rates still climbing? If founders now meditate, journal, and track their HRV, why do so many still crash emotionally after exits? Here's the paradox. We upgraded the lifestyle, but we didn't upgrade the operating system. We changed the optics, not the structure. And that leads us to something we need to confront directly. Part 1, the collapse of the old model. For decades, leadership followed a predictable blueprint. Power meant control, success meant scale, speed meant intelligence. The modern CEO was trained to optimize margins, dominate competitors, and push teams beyond comfort. And it worked, until it didn't. Because something subtle began to fracture beneath the surface. Burnout became normal, anxiety became standard, trust eroded quietly inside organizations. Leaders won markets but lost marriages, built empires but collapsed internally. We built companies that scaled faster than our capacity to stay grounded. Here is the uncomfortable truth. We optimized strategy, but we neglected consciousness, and eventually the internal debt always collects. The old model assumed emotional suppression was strength, that vulnerability was weakness, that reflection was inefficiency. But neuroscience tells us something different. A dysregulated nervous system makes worse decisions. An ego-driven leader distorts risk assessment. An anxious mind narrows strategic thinking. In other words, internal chaos becomes external cost. And markets over time punish distortion. So the real question becomes, if the old operating system is unstable, what replaces it? Part 2, the emergence of the hybrid. Let's remove the confusion immediately. The hybrid CEO is not soft. They make hard decisions. They allocate capital under uncertainty. They cut losses. They move when timing matters. But they operate from a deeper premise. Leadership is not only a financial function, it is a neurobiological and psychological function. And this is not theory. It is measurable. Leadership is a nervous system multiplier. Research in neuroscience is clear. Decision quality is directly influenced by stress regulation. Studies from institutions like Stanford and Harvard have shown that chronic stress reduces activity in the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for strategic thinking, impulse control, and long-term planning. Under stress, the brain shifts toward threat detection and short-term survival bias. In simple terms, a dysregulated nervous system narrows thinking. It increases risk aversion when boldness is required, risk seeking when validation is threatened, defensive communication, reduced cognitive flexibility. Now apply that to a CEO making multi-million-dollar decisions. Internal state is not personal. It is structural. Gallup's global workplace studies repeatedly show that employee engagement strongly correlates with leadership behavior. Teams led by emotionally intelligent managers show significantly higher productivity and lower turnover. Why? Because every room has a psychological climate, and climate determines performance. Emotional climate impacts financial performance. Research from Google's Project Aristotle found that the highest performing teams were not defined by IQ, seniority, or technical excellence. They were defined by psychological safety. Psychological safety is directly influenced by leader behavior. When leaders regulate emotion, teams speak up earlier, risk signals surface faster, innovation cycles shorten, errors are caught before escalation. Conversely, when leaders are ego-reactive, information gets filtered, teams hide uncertainty, decision loops slow down, risk compounds silently. McKinsey studies on organizational health consistently show that companies in the top quartile of leadership effectiveness outperform bottom quartile peers significantly in long-term total returns to shareholders. That gap is not explained by strategy alone. It is explained by execution quality, which is human. And humans respond emotionally first. Perception is emotional. Before rational behavioral economics has already dismantled the myth of purely rational actors. Daniel Kahneman's work on System 1 and System 2 thinking demonstrates that rapid, emotion-driven processing happens before analytical reasoning. That means, before your board analyzes your strategy, they feel your conviction. Before your team evaluates your plan, they sense your stability. Before investors assess your model, they detect your composure under pressure. Perception is emotional first. Logic follows. The hybrid CEO understands this sequence. The two operating systems. The hybrid CEO masters two systems simultaneously. External execution, capital efficiency, market positioning, structural leverage, systems design. These are visible competencies. But without internal mastery, they degrade. Internal architecture. Emotional regulation, cognitive clarity, ego awareness, meaning alignment. These are invisible competencies, but they determine signal quality in decision-making. Research on emotional intelligence by TalentSmart found that EQ accounts for a substantial portion of leadership performance variance across industries. Not charisma, not dominance, regulation. Because when internal state stabilizes, cognitive bandwidth expands, strategic optionality increases, listening depth improves, confirmation bias reduces. When ego quiets, feedback loops shorten, defensive reactions decline, information quality improves. When information quality improves, decisions refine. When decisions refine, compounding accelerates. This is not philosophical language, it is performance logic. Structural advantage in volatility. Post-COVID volatility exposed a pattern. Companies with adaptive cultures, strong trust and emotionally intelligent leadership recovered faster. Rigid, fear-driven hierarchies fractured. Why? Because volatility punishes fragility, and fragility often begins internally. A leader who cannot regulate themselves, overcorrects strategy, micromanages, signals panic, burns optionality. A leader with integrated internal architecture absorbs pressure, preserves clarity, maintains relational capital, protects long-term positioning. In unstable environments, emotional stability becomes competitive advantage, not kindness, not softness. Stability. The hybrid CEO does not meditate to feel enlightened. They regulate to think clearly. They build internal architecture because volatility is increasing. They integrate execution and consciousness because fragmentation no longer scales. This is not spirituality. It is precision engineering applied to human leadership. And in a complex, accelerated world, precision compounds. That is structural advantage. Part 3. Calm is a strategic asset. What actually stabilizes a company during volatility? Imagine two CEOs facing the same crisis. Market volatility, revenue contraction, public scrutiny. Same data, same pressure, different internal states. One reacts, one responds. One floods the system with urgency, fragmented direction, late-night escalations, contradictory signals. The other slows the tempo, clarifies priorities, communicates once precisely, holds posture. Which organization stabilizes faster? This is not a personality difference. It is a regulatory difference. Is calm just personality or performance leverage? Calm is often misinterpreted as temperament. It is not. Calm is control over internal volatility, and internal volatility has measurable cognitive consequences. Under acute stress, cortisol spikes, working memory narrows, threat bias increases, impulse decisions rise. Studies in high-stakes environments, aviation, military command, emergency medicine, consistently show that performance under pressure correlates strongly with stress regulation capacity, not IQ. The same applies to executive leadership. A dysregulated leader overcorrects strategy, shortens decision horizons, micromanages, signals instability, and instability spreads. Emotional contagion is not metaphorical. It is neurological. Research in social neuroscience shows that emotional states synchronize across groups through mirror neuron systems and nonverbal signaling. Translation: if the CEO panics, the organization panics. If the CEO stabilizes, the organization recalibrates. Calm is transmission control. Why does calm accelerate recovery? Because volatility amplifies noise. When markets fluctuate, information overload increases. Conflicting forecasts, media amplification, internal speculation, external pressure. In that environment, the scarcest resource is not capital. It is clarity. And clarity requires signal discrimination. Signal discrimination requires cognitive bandwidth. Cognitive bandwidth requires emotional regulation. This is the chain. When leaders operate from reactivity, they increase meeting frequency, they increase communication volume, they reduce decision coherence. When leaders operate from grounded clarity, they simplify, they prioritize, they eliminate unnecessary motion. McKinsey's research on crisis leadership shows that organizations that quickly align around 3 to 5 clear priorities outperform those that fragment into multiple reactive initiatives. Alignment requires a calm center. Without it, organizations thrash. Can calm be trained, or is it innate? The hybrid CEO does not rely on personality. They train regulation deliberately, not for aesthetics, for performance. They build rituals of reflection, physical regulation practices, sleep, movement, breath discipline, structured solitude for strategic thinking, deliberate cognitive reset intervals. Why? Because recovery speed determines resilience. Neuroscience research on resilience shows that high performers are not less stressed. They recover faster. Recovery speed is the metric. The hybrid CEO does not avoid intensity. They metabolize it. They convert pressure into focus rather than fragmentation. Does silence actually improve decision quality? Counterintuitive, but yes. Silence increases signal quality. When cognitive load decreases, pattern recognition improves. Long-term consequences are weighted more accurately. Risk distortion reduces. In environments of constant stimulation, leaders mistake speed for progress, but speed without clarity compounds error. A calm executive mind sees second-order effects, resists ego-driven urgency, preserves optionality. And optionality is strategic power. What happens when calm is absent? Look at modern founder collapse patterns, overexpansion during hype cycles, aggressive hiring followed by mass layoffs, reactive pivots, reputation damage from impulsive communication. These are not always strategic errors. They are often regulatory failures. Internal chaos eventually becomes external cost. Markets punish distortion over time. Calm is not softness, it is volatility absorption capacity. In an era defined by acceleration, the leader who can hold steady becomes the stabilizing force. And stabilization shortens recovery cycles. Shorter recovery cycles increase resilience. Resilience compounds. That is why calm is not a personality trait, it is a strategic asset. Part 4, Power Redefined. What actually makes people follow? Traditional power is positional. Title, authority, control over resources. It relies on hierarchy. Hybrid power is integrative. It emerges from alignment between values and actions, vision and execution, inner state and outer behavior. When these align, authority becomes natural, not forced, not demanded, not theatrically projected. Natural. Why do people trust coherence more than charisma? Research in organizational psychology consistently shows that trust is built on perceived consistency and reliability, not dominance. Trust has 3 pillars: competence, integrity, benevolence. Integrity, in particular, is measured by behavioral alignment over time, not slogans. People do not follow perfection. They follow coherence. When a leader's words, tone, timing, and behavior align, the brain categorizes them as predictable. Predictability reduces threat perception. Reduced threat increases cooperation. This is neurobiological, not emotional preference. Incoherence triggers cognitive dissonance, and cognitive dissonance erodes trust. What do microfractures look like? Incoherence rarely explodes overnight. It leaks, saying transparency matters but hiding mistakes, talking about culture but rewarding political behavior, promoting balance but glorifying burnout. Each inconsistency creates a microfracture. Employees detect it quickly. Studies on employee engagement show that perceived hypocrisy from leadership significantly reduces discretionary effort. Not because employees rebel, because trust drops. When trust drops, psychological safety declines, risk-taking decreases, innovation slows, communication filters increase, performance follows, always. Why does alignment scale faster than control? Traditional power attempts to scale through structure, rules, KPIs, monitoring systems. These are necessary, but insufficient. Culture does not scale from policy. It scales from nervous systems. Behavioral contagion research confirms that emotional patterns spread hierarchically. The leader's baseline becomes the organization's baseline. If the CEO reacts defensively, managers mirror defensiveness, operates in fear, teams operate cautiously, displays grounded conviction, teams stabilize. You cannot fake alignment long-term. Microexpressions, tone shifts, and decision patterns reveal internal state. Humans are highly attuned to incongruence, and incongruence increases perceived risk. Perceived risk reduces performance. What happens when power is integrated? When values and behavior align, decision speed increases, less internal conflict, communication simplifies, cultural clarity strengthens, strategic focus sharpens. Why? Because cognitive dissonance is expensive. An internally misaligned leader wastes mental energy managing contradictions. An aligned leader operates with reduced internal friction. Reduced friction increases throughput. Throughput compounds. Hybrid power is not louder. It is cleaner. Less ego distortion. Less performative dominance. Less hidden insecurity. More coherence. And coherence is stabilizing. In volatile environments, stabilizing forces accumulate trust. Trust accumulates execution velocity. Execution velocity compounds advantage. This is not philosophical reframing. It is structural performance logic. The hybrid CEO does not obsess over alignment for moral signaling. They obsess over it because misalignment is costly, and cost eventually shows up on the balance sheet. Part 5, profit as byproduct. Does this reduce competitiveness or redefine it? Let's address the practical concern. Does this model make a company softer, less aggressive, less competitive? No, it increases durability, and durability outperforms aggression over time. How can pressure extract profit? Yes. Can it sustain it? Rarely. Short-term gains can absolutely be extracted through pressure and fear. High-output cultures driven by urgency can spike productivity temporarily, but longitudinal research in organizational behavior shows that chronic high-pressure environments increase burnout, voluntary turnover, error rates, ethical violations. Gallup estimates that low engagement costs the global economy trillions annually in lost productivity. Fear may produce output, but it erodes discretionary effort, the extra 10 to 20% that differentiates high-performing organizations, and that margin compounds. What actually drives long-term outperformance? Multiple large-scale studies from McKinsey and Harvard Business School indicate that companies with strong organizational health, defined by trust, clarity, and alignment, outperform peers in long-term total shareholder returns. Why? Because execution consistency improves. Execution consistency reduces volatility. Reduced volatility preserves capital. Preserved capital increases strategic flexibility. Flexibility compounds. The hybrid CEO does not reject profit. They reframe it. Profit becomes a measurement of system health, a reflection of value creation, a signal of market resonance, not an idol, an indicator. Why does coherence translate to market advantage? Markets reward coherence. Customers may not articulate it, but they detect alignment. Brand trust research consistently shows that perceived authenticity increases customer loyalty and lifetime value. Internally, psychological safety increases innovation output. Google's research demonstrated that teams with high psychological safety were more innovative and adaptable. Innovation requires risk-taking. Risk-taking requires safety. Safety requires trust. Trust requires coherence. This is causal, not abstract. Is profit a target or a consequence? When an organization is internally aligned, externally precise, culturally stable, profitability becomes a natural output because waste decreases, decision cycles shorten, retention improves, reputation strengthens, strategic pivots become cleaner. The hybrid CEO builds in sequence: clarity, safety, execution, compounding. Clarity reduces confusion, safety increases participation, participation improves execution, execution compounds performance. This is architecture, not ideology. It is structural design applied to human systems. And well-designed systems outperform force-driven systems over time. Not because they are kinder, because they are more stable. And stability under volatility becomes alpha. Part 6. What discipline is required to sustain the calm? Let me remove any illusion. This path is harder. It demands self-confrontation, ego auditing, emotional literacy, strategic restraint. It requires the courage to ask, am I reacting from fear? Am I defending identity? Am I chasing validation disguised as growth? Most leaders never ask these questions. Hybrid CEOs build mechanisms to ensure they must. They surround themselves with truth tellers. They schedule reflection with the same seriousness as board meetings. They measure internal metrics alongside financial ones. Energy, focus, cognitive sharpness, because they understand something profound. If the instrument is distorted, the output will be distorted, and the instrument is the self. Part 7. Speed and depth. We operate in an age of compression. AI shortens innovation cycles from years to months. Markets revalue companies in hours. Information floods every dashboard, every device, every decision. Leadership now exists inside constant velocity. The instinctive response is obvious. Move faster. Decide sooner. Scale aggressively. Speed becomes the visible proof of competence. But speed is not intelligence, it is motion. Hybrid CEOs recognize a critical paradox. As external acceleration increases, internal depth becomes non-negotiable. Depth is not delay, it is clarity under pressure. It is the ability to detect weak signals before they escalate, to differentiate noise from pattern, to distinguish urgency from significance. Without depth, speed turns reactive. With depth, speed becomes strategic leverage. A clear mind processes complexity efficiently. A regulated nervous system sustains performance in volatility. A leader grounded internally adapts without fragmentation. This is not slow leadership. It is controlled acceleration. Speed without depth produces instability, erratic pivots, cultural inconsistency, strategic drift. Depth without execution produces inertia, insight without impact. The hybrid model integrates both dimensions. Depth sets direction. Execution builds momentum. In physics, force without direction dissipates. In leadership, energy without clarity does the same. Hybrid CEOs invest in thinking frameworks. They protect reflective bandwidth. They engineer decision systems that minimize emotional distortion, because the fastest organization is not the most frantic, it is the one with the lowest internal friction. Depth reduces friction. Reduced friction enables sustainable velocity. That is the distinction. Part 8. Identity and image. We function in an era of intensified visibility. Social platforms reward performance. Media cycles reward storytelling. Personal branding has evolved into its own parallel economy. Within this landscape, many leaders focus on shaping perception. They polish their tone, design their image, manage their optics. Hybrid CEOs operate differently. They design structure. They align values with incentives, strategy with behavior, communication with decision-making. As a result, image becomes an outcome, not a constructed facade. A mask demands upkeep. Upkeep drains cognitive and emotional bandwidth. When leaders project a version of themselves disconnected from their internal framework, friction forms. That friction seeps into culture. Incoherence carries a cost. It appears as distrust, as misalignment, as quiet resistance. Coherence, in contrast, is efficient. When identity and action are aligned, energy is preserved. Decisions require less inner negotiation. Communication becomes clearer. Leadership becomes less performative and, paradoxically, more compelling, because people sense congruence. Even if they cannot define it, they recognize it. Presence replaces performance. Presence is not theatrics. It is steady attention anchored in internal alignment, and presence cannot be artificially sustained over time. Eventually, the mask fractures. The persona collapses. But structure remains. Hybrid CEOs recognize that enduring influence is built from the inside outward. Reputation becomes the shadow cast by character. Brand becomes the resonance of behavior. The leader stops chasing perception. They refine coherence, and perception realigns on its own. Now start Part 9, the inner frontier. Human civilization has expanded outward at extraordinary speed. We have ventured into space, decoded genomes, constructed global digital systems, yet the most intricate system remains insufficiently developed: self-awareness. The human psyche, with its biases, fears, ambitions, and distortions, continues to be the decisive variable in organizational outcomes. Hybrid CEOs approach introspection as infrastructure, not as a luxury, not as withdrawal. Infrastructure, because unchecked internal drivers scale with authority. Ambition, when left unexamined, turns into addiction. Growth pursued for validation rather than value. Fear, when unexamined, transforms into control, power used to silence uncertainty. Insecurity, when unexamined, becomes aggression, dominance compensating for fragility. At the individual level, these distortions strain relationships. At the institutional level, they destabilize entire ecosystems. Modern organizations amplify psychology. One insecure leader can unsettle thousands. One regulated leader can steady thousands. Leadership is leverage. Leverage magnifies clarity and distortion. Therefore, the leader's internal condition is not private, it is systemic. Hybrid CEOs construct mechanisms to examine their internal terrain. They welcome dissent. They formalize feedback loops. They monitor energy and cognitive sharpness. They understand that decision quality declines when emotional regulation breaks down. Inner literacy prevents outer damage, and the stakes are significant. In an interconnected economy, the ripple effects of executive instability extend far beyond quarterly earnings. They shape culture, communities, markets. Self-awareness becomes a form of risk governance. Part Text, the legacy question. Eventually, market share shifts, technologies evolve, titles fade, no executive role is permanent. The deeper assessment arrives later. What did your leadership create in human terms? Did people expand under your guidance or contract? Did your organization develop independent thinkers or compliant followers? Did you create dependency or capability? Hybrid CEOs think in decades. They build systems that outlast personality. They shape cultures that endure beyond their presence. This demands maturity. Short-term metrics reward extraction. Long-term legacy rewards construction. Extraction produces temporary dominance. Construction produces lasting institutions. A mature leader asks, if I disappeared tomorrow, would the system collapse or continue evolving? Durability becomes the real measure of leadership quality, because sustainable impact is evaluated not only by valuation, but by developmental contribution. Did your presence raise the collective standard of thinking? Did it sharpen ethics? Did it reinforce resilience? Legacy is not sentiment, it is structural imprint. Hybrid CEOs build with that time horizon in view. Part ZEV, the call forward. This is not a rejection of ambition, it is its refinement. Ambition without awareness becomes consumption. It drains energy, people, ecosystems. Ambition with awareness becomes construction. It builds systems, capability, stability. The world does not need fewer powerful leaders. It needs more integrated ones. Leaders capable of decisive execution. Leaders capable of holding emotional complexity. Leaders capable of navigating volatility without internal fragmentation. Calm is not passivity. It is regulated intensity. It is competitive advantage in a world addicted to reaction. The future will favor those who can stand at the intersection of data and intuition, capital and consciousness, power and restraint. That intersection is narrow. On one side lies aggression without reflection, on the other, reflection without action. The hybrid CEO unites both. The world is accelerating, noise is intensifying, complexity is compounding, pressure is unavoidable. The decisive question is structural. Can your internal architecture absorb that pressure without fracturing? Because leadership is no longer about dominating markets. It is about stabilizing ecosystems, organizations, communities, information environments. The most powerful leaders of the next era will not be those who amplify chaos. They will be those who remain clear when everything else trembles. The hybrid CEO is not a job title. It is a developmental stage, a commitment to mastering external execution and internal architecture at the same time, a willingness to confront ego without abandoning ambition. A discipline to regulate before reacting, a decision to build clarity rather than project noise. The evolution is already in motion. The only remaining question, will you accelerate without depth or integrate both and endure? If this shifted your thinking, if this conversation challenged you, good. That means you're not passively consuming, you're actively processing. If it changed how you view leadership, ambition, or power, don't keep that shift to yourself. Comment the insight that struck you hardest. Not the comfortable one, the honest one. Like this episode, if you believe leadership must evolve, share it with someone who is building, scaling, or carrying pressure quietly. And if you're serious about elevating how you think and lead, subscribe to this channel, because ideas shape thinking. Thinking shapes decisions. Decisions shape systems, and systems shape the future. Let's raise the standard of leadership together.